Okay, corporations have been going woke. Anybody notice that? Especially with regard to election reform, following all the attention received by the state of Georgia over its new voting laws. But so far, there's been little corporate backlash against the states that have passed or moving forward legislation that pushes back against the transgenderism agenda. I guess they can only fight so many things at one time. Here's an interesting, take on this, and this is what caught my attention. This was in the Associated Press today. It's almost like a dog whistle, I think, to the left, but here's the headline. New laws targeting transgender rights face little backlash. 5 states have passed laws or implemented executive orders this year limiting the ability of transgender youths to play sports or receive certain medical treatment. There's been a vehement outcry from supporters of transgender rights, but little in the way of, listen to this, tangible repercussions for those states. It's a striking contrast to the fate of North Carolina a few years ago, when its legislature passed a bill in March of 2016 limiting which public restrooms transgender people could use. There was a swift and powerful backlash. The NBA and the NCAA relocated events. Some companies scrapped expansion plans. By March 2017, the bill's bathroom provisions were repealed. The threat was all these companies were going to lose. They were going to move. They were going to tank North Carolina's economy, when in fact the opposite happened. Now, I can't explain the retreat that the Republicans did in the legislature there, but I can tell you this, that when you stand up to these cultural bullies, they go away. And it appears that as we've seen multiple states now stand up and simply say, no, we're pursuing common sense policy, these leftists have gone away. At least they've gone silent for a while. Join me now to talk more about this and its impact upon the state of North Carolina, which quite frankly is doing pretty well, is Congressman Dan Bishop. He represents the 9th Congressional District of North Carolina and was in the legislature back when the legislature passed HB 2. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tony, glad to be with you. In fact, not only was I in the legislature, I was the lead primary sponsor of HB 2.
And I was going to let you tell our listeners about that and the tremendous pushback that came from the sports leagues and such, but also the story of how the economy continued to go up, tourism up. Doesn't look like North Carolina suffered at all.
You know, Tony, what they engage in with these woke corporate backlash efforts is a form of hysteria. And there's really not much there. So even in the year 2016, where HB 2 was passed in March and remained on the books throughout that year, it was by some distance the best tourism year for North Carolina ever. And the General Assembly fiscal staff, at my request when I remained there in 2018, took a look to see if they could detect any economic impact to North Carolina. And the answer was there was no detectable economic impact. And yet, establishment media have for forever, during the event, during 2016 and in years past, they've all cited one article by 2 AP reporters with no economic expertise, no analysis, no examination of data, who just sort of back of the envelope came up with the notion that there had been $3.76 billion of economic impact on North Carolina. It was absurd. And I think what you're seeing is you can only maintain kind of a bully's bravado a few times till you're called out. And now they've gone to the well more often than they can, because they're not only opposing laws to keep children safe from mutilation in the interest of transgender ideology, or laws to allow females to have competitive athletics without having males participate in them. But there are also the corporate mobs being called out to attack states for pursuing integrity in their elections.
Right.
Like Georgia with their voter ID, basically liberalized everything except for required voter ID, and the woke corporations were called out to go wild.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are still some within the ranks of Republicans that do not understand. I mean, I kind of go back, and I know this upsets people, but it's the same principle. You know, Ronald Reagan said we don't negotiate with terrorists. Look, I see these folks as cultural terrorists. They're bullying people. You don't negotiate with them. You do what is right. You do what the American people, your constituents want. We saw this recently in Arkansas. I've got a clip here of Governor Hutchinson, unfortunately caving, but we had a strong legislature. They overrode his veto. Play clip number 5.
I also recognize the image of Arkansas is important and that we have a growing economy. And when people want to look at Arkansas, I want them to think of a place that is tolerant, that has a hate crime bill, that is acceptance of people that might be different, and that we put a value on other people's lives that might be different than ours. I want that image of Arkansas. So image is also always important for a governor, and the impression people have of our state.
You know, and I like Governor Hutchinson. He's a friend. I talked to him through that process and respect him. I disagree, and he knows that. With his decision to veto the SAFE Act there in Arkansas. But here's the point, the intimidation that came, you could hear it in what he had to say, that they were concerned that businesses wouldn't come there. You get these, as you mentioned, these corporations that say, we're going to take our business elsewhere. Bottom line is this, though, is that these corporations want a favorable environment for their business when it comes to taxes, when it comes to regulation. And guess what? It's the states that have conservative social policy that have the same conservative fiscal policy. So they have to take both. They can't pick and choose, because if you go to these liberal states with the liberal ideology, it includes bad fiscal policy too.
Well, you know, frankly, Tony, whether an economy, you're right that the strongest economies are in southern states and Republican states that have stood up for these principles, and people are moving there and away from blue states. But regardless, no corporation is going to abandon major parts of the American market. Certainly not the best ones. And what you've seen Governor Hutchinson do there is fall prey to the bullying. You know, it's interesting. I never backed down. I never advocated for the repeal of HB2. I've been elected 4 times since then, and some who waffled weren't. So I just think the lessons are clear. And I would certainly say to all those states that have voters that want these values protected, that the corporations describe in the most ridiculous ways when they're attacking, those voters resent corporations nullifying their votes. And I think the thing to do is, you got to show them who's boss. The people who have been elected by the people to serve make the decisions, not CEOs, not the radical HR departments that have been, infested with these woke lefties. You just cannot cave to that. And this phenomenon will go away if a number of states stand up to it.
You are absolutely correct. Governor Kemp is a good example of that in Georgia. He has stood up to this, and I've had him on the program several times, and I credit him with other states moving forward with their election reform efforts, like Governor Ducey in Arizona and other states that have taken this on, because he stood up to Coca-Cola, to Delta, to Amazon, to these big corporate bullies, and said, no, this is my job to protect elections and the integrity of elections, and I'm going to do it. And more elected officials need to call their bluff. And I think North Carolina is a perfect example that they're bluffing. They can't hurt your economy. Your economy grew, and it continues to grow. In fact, you picked up another congressional seat.
Absolutely. Tony, I think you're right. Call their bluff, not only by maintaining a defensive posture, go on counterattack. In Georgia, they filed a bill to repeal Delta Airlines aviation fuel tax credit.
Yes.
And Governor Kemp went out after. I mean, the MLB has had to defend the fact that they've retaliated against Atlanta, a community in which business owners are majority Black, and Stacey Abrams is having to bear the brunt of that ridiculous activism. So that's the thing. I say, not only stand pat, but go after these woke corporate powers.
That's it. That is an extremely good point, Dan. And it's something actually that the Republican Party could learn from Donald Trump. Donald Trump was one who, he felt like the best defense is a good offense, and he was constantly on the offense, maybe a little bit too much. But the point is, the things you believe in, fight for them, and don't hunker down in a foxhole. Charge the hill. You're absolutely right. More Republican leaders need to realize the times in which we're in. There's very little middle ground. You've got the left, you've got the right, and our folks need to believe. Like you said, you've been elected multiple times, having taken these strong positions. People do not get excited about yellow stripes in the middle of the road. They don't want something in the middle of the road. They want to know where their leaders stand. And I still believe to this day, that is why Donald Trump had so much support. Whether you liked him or not, you knew where he stood, and those who liked it stood with him.
That's exactly right. There is a great and intense hunger out there for people center right, for elected officials who will who will stand up for their convictions. That's got to be responded to. I certainly am going to respond to it. I don't care whether I remain in office or not. If someone wants to dump me because I've stood up for the principles I've been elected upon, so be it. But my responsibility is to stand for the principles. Let the voters choose.
Absolutely. And that's the way I approached when I was in office. If I got reelected, fine. If not, that's fine too. I'm going to continue to do what I've been called to do, and that is to stand for truth and advocate for those truths that are beneficial to all people, whether they recognize it or not. Before we run out of time, Dan Bishop, I want to talk about the future of Congress. I mean, obviously right now, the Democrats control the House and the Senate, but very narrow margins in both the House and the Senate. Just I barely mentioned it, but the redistrict or the census numbers and what may come from that may even accomplish a switch of Republican to Democratic majorities in the House. But this is my question for you, Dan Bishop. Will the Republicans, as we've been talking about, and they don't have a history of this in Congress, but fight for these principles when the American people give them the leadership once again?
Well, Tony, it's a very related point to what we were just discussing. And we had the Republican conference retreat the past couple of days, just got back home yesterday evening. And Ben Shapiro gave a great keynote speech the last evening. And he said, be bold. He laid out the sort of things we should do. And I've got to tell you, Tony, I'm not 100% sure that all of the conference is yet embracing that. I certainly know I was the person who made the motion to vacate the chair, to remove Liz Cheney as our conference chair. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me about that. We didn't come close to winning. We only had about 61 Republicans support that move. I think as time has gone on, it becomes clearer and clearer that it's the right thing to do. But it's going to require people taking stands and being prepared to be bold. And, Ben Shapiro said it. I asked the Q&A, during the Q&A, I asked Ben whether he would, what would be the price if we aren't prepared to be bold? And he said, it's like a one-way ratchet. The American people are going to give up on national politics if Republicans don't do more than just stand pat.
Yes, he's absolutely right. I hear that. It is time for bold, courageous leadership. And Dan Bishop, I thank you for being one of those leaders, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. It was a great pleasure to be with you. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Congressman.